Hi, I'm Mike Hayden from IntelliWolf, and in today's CSS Crash Course, we will be covering padding and margin. If you're brand new to CSS, I encourage you to watch our video on an introduction to CSS. So the reason we're covering padding and margin together is because they follow the same formatting rules and shortcuts. They're both part of what we call the box model. The box model is a way of understanding how margin, padding, and border work together around our content. As you can see in the diagram, we have the text in the center. The space immediately around that is controlled by the padding settings. The margin is on the outside, and the border splits the two. It's very important that you remember this box model. Proper spacing is one of the key parts of a good design. There are dozens of ways to manipulate these values to get the design to look the way you want. So the way you write margin and padding instructions are the same. So in these examples, when you see margin, so we've got margin top, for example. If you wanted to do the padding, you would just do padding top. So just substitute padding where needed. One way of writing margin is to write each out like this. You wouldn't normally do it this way when you want to set all four margins on a container, but these settings or these instructions will be useful if you've already set the margins for a class and you just want to change, say, the bottom margin for this specific container. So if you're setting the margin on all sides, there's a quicker way of doing it than writing all four of them out. Each of these are a different setup. So don't worry about which side is which for now. In the next slide, I'll give you a handy memory tool I developed years ago. So in this first example, you're setting the margin on all sides to 10 pixels. The second one, you've got two sides are set to 10 pixels and two sides to 50. And then in this one, we've got 0, and remember, when we have a 0 value, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to write the pixels. You can if you want, but you don't need to. That's why it's left out of here deliberately. So this one's got 0 on one side, 50 on two of the sides, and then 10 pixels on one of the sides. So notice that there's no commas between any of these. It's spaced. This initial space isn't necessary. It's just good for easy reading. But when you're doing 4 out like this, you've got top, right, bottom, and left. So let's have a look at the memory tool that I came up with back in 2001 when I first learned CSS. So the order goes top, right, bottom, left. It follows the points of a compass, north, east, south, west. So we have a saying in Australia: never eat soggy Weet-Bix. That's the way that I was taught my directions. Never eat soggy Weet-Bix, north, east, south, west. So if you remember that when it comes to margin and padding, you'll always get the order right. So let's have a look at how you can shorten it even further. So I've removed the pixels from these examples on the left, just for clarity. So for this first example, where we've got 10, 10, 10, 10, we're setting a margin of 10 pixels on each side. You can shorten it just to 10. So all 4 of them condense into 1. And the browser all the browsers follow these rules. So they will know that if you do margin is 10 pixels and you just do it like this, then you'll have, it'll set the margin on all 4 sides. So then in the second one, we're setting, remember, it's north, east, south, west. So north and south of these ones, 10 and 10 is the north and south, 50 and 50, east and west. And so we can shorten it like this because the 10s are the same and the 50s are the same. And then on the third example, we've got north, east, south, west. And notice we can shorten this 50 here, but because the north and south are different, so you've got the north and south as different ones, but east and west are the same. So in that instance, you can shorten the east and west, but not the north and south. So then these last two are a little bit counterintuitive, perhaps. You would think you've got, the two 10s here and you've got two 10s here, so you would think that perhaps you could shorten it, but unfortunately, because of quirks of the spacing to allow us to do this shortening, we can't. So you can only shorten it when the opposite sides are the same value, in this instance here. So we've got north and east are the same, but it's not north and south, so you can't shorten that. It doesn't matter that both the top and the right are the same. You would only be able to shorten it if all of them are the same. And then in this last one, we want the top and bottom to be 10 pixels, the right to be 50 pixels, and the left to be 13 pixels. We can't shorten this even though the opposite sides, the top and the bottom, are the same because of a quirk of order. So if you see this third example, where we took out the last value being the left, now if you look at the second example where we took out both the left and the bottom entries, so when you shorten it, you can only take out the fourth value if it's a double. Stay with me. You can only take out the fourth value if it's a double, and only then can you take out the third value if that's a double, and then if the second one is also a double, then you can take that out. So you can you have to work from the right. So you look at the west, and if west and east are the same, then you can take out this one, and then you move up to the next level. All right, well, if north and south are the same, you can take that out. And in this instance, we're left with north and south being the same, east and west being the same. But if this 50 pixels on the second example was a 10, then those would also be the same, and then you can finally drop it back to a single value. So you work from the right, because otherwise there's no way of the machine understanding what exactly it is that you're saying. So I know it can be a bit confusing, so until you're comfortable with the shorthand, feel free to start with the north, east, south, west format. And this 10, the one that we looked in the previous one. If I was just starting out, I would start off doing all four like this, and once you're comfortable, then you can start shortening it like this. Okay, so before we move on to seeing the box model in action, there's one more useful instruction when it comes to margin, and this one only applies to margin. All the rest that we've spoken about in the video applies equally to margin and padding, but this specific one, this only applies to margin. So a useful way of centering a div inside its parent sideways is to use margin, and then the value being 0 and auto. Of course, 0 can be whatever you want, and as we saw in the previous one with shorting, you might have margin 10, auto 5, etc. So if you remember back to our shorthand, we're setting the top and bottom margins to 0, and then setting the left and right margins to auto. The essential part is that left and right is auto. That means it will place the div automatically in the center. It's very handy for responsive design, so you don't have to calculate the exact width in pixels for the parents and set the sides that way. Alright, on to our example. So we have our text sitting in this box, ready to apply the box model, and notice inside the box how I've used the margin 0 auto. Let's make this a bit bigger. Margin 0 auto in this one to set the side being centered. So watch what happens when I set a 10 pixel margin. Save that, refresh. Actually, let's set it to 50 to make it clearer. Alright, so we set a 50 pixel margin. Alright, now we set padding. Save that and refresh. Now, to show the separation between the two, I'm just going to throw in a border, so we'll deal with how you write border and what this shorthand means in another video. So let's go 2 pixels, solid red. And then you'll see the border come up in between the margin and the padding. So if we take away the padding, you see, it goes up to the border. And then if we take away the margin, like so, it's back to how it was. Put the padding back in. So save that. So we've got padding. So now the padding is going to affect the inside of the border, like so. And last thing before we wrap up this video, if I add in another content block below, you can see that they sit right next to each other. So let's just duplicate this content block, copy and paste, save, and update. Alright, so you can see that they're sitting right next to each other. If I want to add some space in between them, I can set the margin. There we go. Let's see that a bit better. I can set the margin in between them, but we aren't limited to margin being all around, so let's just go set the margin, the bottom margin. Alright, so you've got just the bottom margin, and so that's providing the space in between these blocks. If there is no border and it's got the same background, you can often get away with using either margin or padding or both. But when you need a more detailed control over the positioning, remember the box model and north, east, south, west.